Habermas versus Foucault on power and communication. When we think about society and how people interact, one of the biggest questions is how power and communication are connected. Two of the most important thinkers who dealt with this issue are Jürgen Habermas and Michel Foucault. Both had very different approaches to understanding how people communicate, how knowledge is shared, and how power operates in everyday life. Their ideas might seem abstract, but they actually help us understand many real-life situations, such as politics, media, education, law, and even personal conversations. To put it simply, Habermas believed in the possibility of communication that is free, fair, and rational, while Foucault believed that communication is always shaped and influenced by power. Comparing their views helps us see the tension between the ideal of open dialogue and the reality of power struggles in society. Jürgen Habermas is often described as an optimist about communication. He believed that humans are capable of achieving understanding through what he called communicative action. For him, the best form of communication is one where people can exchange ideas honestly, without manipulation, and where the best argument wins. He imagined a kind of ideal speech situation where everyone has an equal chance to speak, no one is forced, and participants listen carefully to each other with the goal of reaching common understanding. Habermas thought that in modern society, this kind of communication is crucial for democracy. If people can talk openly and freely, then they can work together to solve problems and build fair institutions. His work is rooted in the belief that reason and dialogue have the power to improve society and bring people closer to justice and equality. On the other side, Michel Foucault was much more skeptical. He did not believe that communication could ever be completely free from power. For him, power is not just something held by governments or powerful individuals, but something that is spread throughout society in everyday practices, institutions, and discourses. According to Foucault, whenever people speak, they are not only communicating ideas but also reinforcing certain power relations. For example, when doctors speak about medicine, they are not only sharing knowledge but also defining what is considered normal or abnormal, healthy or unhealthy. In this way, their communication carries authority and shapes how people think about themselves and others. Foucault called this relationship between knowledge and power, power/knowledge. He believed that knowledge is never neutral but always tied to power. This difference between Habermas and Foucault becomes clear if we think about how laws are made or how public debates happen. Habermas would argue that, ideally, laws should be created through rational discussion where citizens and leaders debate openly until the most reasonable position is agreed upon. He sees democracy as a space where communicative rationality guides decision-making. Foucault, however, would point out that laws are always influenced by hidden power relations. He would argue that even in debates that look open and fair, there are always structures of dominance at play. For instance, some people may have more access to media, better education, or more authority, which means their voices carry more weight than others. For Foucault, communication is never just about exchanging ideas. It is always about who gets to define truth and whose voice counts. A good way to compare them is to think about a public discussion on healthcare. Habermas would imagine that if everyone, doctors, patients, policymakers, and citizens, sat together and shared their views in good faith, then society could find the most rational and fair solution for healthcare. Foucault would argue that the discussion is already shaped by the power of medical institutions, pharmaceutical companies, and governments, which decide what counts as valid knowledge and who gets to speak with authority. Even the language used in the debate reflects power, because certain ways of talking about health are accepted while others are dismissed. Habermas's approach is inspiring because it shows us a vision of communication as a tool for freedom and fairness. It gives us hope that through dialogue, people can overcome divisions and create just systems. At the same time, critics argue that his idea of an ideal speech situation is unrealistic because it assumes people can completely remove power from communication, which rarely happens in reality. Foucault's perspective, on the other hand, is powerful because it forces us to see how deeply power is embedded in everyday life. It reminds us that communication is not neutral and that every conversation carries power relations. But some critics argue that Foucault's view can feel too pessimistic, as if there is no way to escape power and create truly fair dialogue. In many ways, Habermas and Foucault represent two sides of a coin. Habermas gives us an ideal to strive for, a world where communication is fair and equal. Foucault grounds us in reality by showing how power operates in ways we might not notice. Together, they help us understand both the hope and the limitations of human communication. In the real world, we probably need to combine both perspectives. We can aim for fair and open dialogue like Habermas suggests, while also being aware, like Foucault reminds us, that power always shapes who gets to speak, who gets heard, and what counts as truth. This debate between Habermas and Foucault is not just academic, it affects how we think about media, politics, education, and even personal relationships. In politics, for example, Habermas's ideas support the importance of free speech, public debate, and democratic participation, while Foucault's ideas remind us to ask whose interests are really being served and whose voices are being excluded. In media, Habermas would encourage spaces where people can rationally discuss issues, while Foucault would push us to question how media owners, advertisers, and institutions shape what information is shared. In personal life, Habermas would encourage honest and respectful communication, while Foucault would make us aware of how even family roles or friendships can be influenced by hidden power dynamics. Ultimately, the conversation between Habermas and Foucault teaches us that communication is both a possibility for freedom and a site of power struggles. We cannot assume that talking automatically creates fairness, but we also should not give up on the hope that dialogue can bring people together. Instead, we must constantly balance the ideal of free communication with the reality of power. By doing so, we can better understand our world and work toward more just and inclusive societies. If you found this explanation useful and you want to learn more about big ideas in sociology and philosophy made simple, please make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps me continue making content that turns complex theories into easy-to-understand discussions for everyone.